Okay, folks, I'm gonna get going for this evening. And if other folks kind of come in later on, that's okay, because we're also recording this event. So anyone that can't stay in for the whole thing, we will be having this on all of our distribution channels after the event. But for now, good evening. Welcome to Winning Farm Fresh School Meals for All. I'm your host for this evening. My name is Tom Proctor. I'm Rights and Democracy's statewide organizer for food justice in Vermont. Tonight, we have been joined by a wonderful group of advocates and organizations that have been fighting hard to ensure we secure universal, nutritious meals for all students across our state. During this crisis, we have proven that we have the ability to provide the resources for our students to really thrive. In the State House, thanks to S100, we have the opportunity to make universal school meals permanent, and also build on what is already in place to make sure that those meals are made with nutritious local produce from Vermont farms. Our first speakers this evening are from the two organizations that have been central to fighting for this bill and for food justice in Vermont. From Hunger Free Vermont, we have Faye Mack, and from Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed, we have Betsy Rosenbluth. Take it away, you two.
Great, welcome everyone. As Tom said, my name is Faye Mack. I am the Advocacy and Education Director at Hunger Free Vermont. And I am going to go ahead and show my screen briefly as Betsy, who will introduce herself in a moment. She and I are going to welcome you all and give a little bit of background on Farm Fresh School Meals for All and the vision that we are working together toward. So just one second while I get that up and running. Apologies, I don't know what has happened with my slideshow. There we go. All right. Great. So again, welcome. We're so happy to have you all here tonight to talk a little bit about Farm Fresh School Meals for All. And today is a really exciting day to be talking with you all about our advocacy initiative, because it's been a really big afternoon in the Senate. We are really excited to share with you all. We'll talk more about all of the details in a little bit. But today the Senate has passed some of the major key components of Farm Fresh School Meals for All, both in bill form and in parts of the state budget. So we've made huge advancements today, and it's so exciting to have a chance to celebrate with some of you all tonight rather than being alone in our houses. So we're really, really happy to be here and share all of that. But what we want to start out with first is to share the vision of the full Farm Fresh School Meals for All package. And so Betsy and I are going to talk a little bit about that. Betsy, you want to introduce yourself and get us going?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy Rosenbluth. I'm the project director for Vermont Feed at Shelburne Farms. And this is a graphic, if you can see it, that shows how the three components that we're advocating for in the legislature leads to what we call a virtuous cycle, a self-reinforcing cycle that brings us to our outcomes. So to summarize, universal school meals for all students. So breakfast and lunch at no charge for all Vermont students, fully funding the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants program, and a local purchasing incentive that would support farmers and school meal programs. And the three work together to improve the quality of school meals, increases participation, which brings more revenue into the meal programs, which means they can buy more local from Vermont farmers, which increases quality. And it's all a cycle that continues and leads to improved student learning and health, strong farms, and eliminating stigma and lunch shaming. And so we've had, as Faye said, the good news that legislators really are seeing and understanding the connection between these programs and how they work together.
Great. So Betsy and I are going to walk through those 3 different components of Farm Fresh School Meals for All. And I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about universal school meals. So to start us off, we have to go way, way back to before the pandemic and remember what school meals were like before the COVID pandemic really turned things upside down in schools. Prior to the pandemic, some schools, about 25% of public schools in Vermont, were providing universal school breakfast and/or universal school lunch. And that means in those schools, children did not have to fill out an application to get access to school meals, and their families did not have to pay for the school meals. All kids got to eat the same meal together, regardless of their family's income. In the other 75% of Vermont's public schools, all of the schools without universal school meals, students have been facing shame, stigma, and cost as major barriers to accessing school meals and to eating them. And that includes students who are even eligible for free school meals and don't need to pay. Most of the school nutrition programs across Vermont currently require some kind of investment through individual school budgets to help round out the school nutrition program budget. So school meals are funded through a variety of different sources of federal funding, state funding, families paying for meals, other sources of revenue, and through the school budget in order to help fully fund that program. Oops, wrong way. And so that is not a great system for feeding our kids and making sure that our kids are ready to learn and are well fed throughout the school day. And so we believe in universal school meals, and that universal school meals is the answer to bringing a more equitable system to the cafeteria and the way that we nourish our children while they're at school and make sure that they're ready to learn. And there's a lot of evidence behind universal school meals as to why that's the answer. And I have a little bit up here on the screen right now. And I won't go through all of it. There's a wealth of research because a number of schools have been providing universal school meals for so many years now. But what we know from studies in Vermont and across the country is that universal school meals improve student well-being, academic performance, and school culture. It results in more low-income students eating school meals than before. So when we move to a universal model, we see more students participate across all incomes and across the board, including with students who are already eligible for free meals but weren't eating because of the stigma associated with the school meal program. We also see really measurable performance improvements in terms of academic performance. And we know that there are children who are not eligible to access the free school meals but need them under the current system, and that by moving to a universal model, all students have access to the meal and it's not dependent on their family's income. In Vermont right now, a household could be making $30,000 less than what the state has determined they need to make to meet their basic needs, and be over income for both Three Squares Vermont and for school meals. So there are a lot of kids out there in Vermont who aren't actually eligible for free school meals right now who need it. So when we talk about universal school meals and bringing universal school meals to all schools in Vermont, the 2 big questions that we get are, how much is this going to cost the state, and what do we actually get for all of that money? Using the participation and what we see in the 25% of schools that were already providing universal school meals, the Joint Fiscal Office in Vermont has determined that based on those numbers, it would cost about $24 to $29 million a year to feed all of our kids through universal school meals. And that would mean moving the 227 more schools over into a universal school meals model. And for that investment in the school meal program, we get a lot. One of the most exciting things is that we see equity in the classroom, and we start to see improved learning, all of those benefits that I mentioned earlier. The program would also bring in about $10 million more a year in federal funding into school meal programs. And excitingly, we'd see 65% more school meals served every year. And you have some numbers on your screen that break that down a little bit. We'd also eliminate school meal debt, and no child would have to learn what hunger feels like while they're at school. So that's a little bit about universal school meals and that component of our vision for Farm Fresh School Meals for All. And I'll turn it back over to Betsy to talk a little bit about the other two components.
Sure. I'm just going to, I can touch briefly on the local purchasing incentive. School nutrition directors want to purchase more local in Vermont, but they're so constrained by cost and by getting the food to the schools. And so the purchasing incentive provides a higher reimbursement for schools that meet a certain threshold of local purchasing. And schools spend about $15.5 million on food every year through the school meal program. So we want to make sure more of those dollars are staying in Vermont with our farmers and producers. There was a study at UVM that showed for every dollar school spends on school meals, $1.60 is contributed to the economy. So if schools purchased even 20% local food, about $5 million would come back to the economy each year. This type of program is in other states, Michigan, New Mexico, New York. And New York anticipates that within 5 years, 72% of their schools will reach 30% spending on New York grown food for lunch. So we know that it's possible. We're excited in Vermont to make it happen and to support school nutrition programs to do it. And we also feel that the bill would not only incentivize more local food being purchased, but put some pressure on the supply chain so that distributors are able to be more transparent with local food, and there's other means for getting food to schools. And the next slide. And just to summarize on the local purchasing incentive, we're looking to launch the program in the first year at $500,000. So that's the amount we're asking for from the legislature. The Farm to School and Early Childhood grants provide technical assistance and grants to K-12 schools and early childhood programs. We are asking the legislature to fully fund that program at $500,000. We've been level at about $171,000 for several years. And in order to reach our goal of farm to school and early childhood in every community and make it the norm for how Vermont feeds and educates its kids, we're looking for full funding for that program. All right.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. So why now? Why is this year the year for us to really be pushing this pretty big vision forward when there's so much else going on as well? Well, we think that now is the time. This is our window. Hunger is at a higher level than it has ever been before, higher than during the Great Recession, higher than at any point since we've been measuring hunger as a country. In Vermont, since the beginning of the pandemic, 1 in 3 people have faced hunger, and that is not equitably distributed as well. So households with children are 2 times more likely to be facing hunger in Vermont, and BIPOC Vermonters are 4 times more likely than white Vermonters to be facing hunger during the pandemic. So there are a lot of people who are facing really dire need in putting food on the table. And we know that the recovery from this high level of hunger is going to be slow. After the Great Recession of 2008, 2011, it took us about 12 years to get back to the levels of hunger we saw before that market crashed. That was a lot longer than it took for our unemployment levels to level out and for us to be quote unquote recovered from the recession. We expect to see a similarly slow recovery. It takes families and individuals a lot longer to recover than it takes the economy overall from something like a pandemic. we also have had universal school meals since March of 2020. So we're in this right now. Children and families and schools are experiencing what it's like when every student has access to a school meal without an application, without having to pay. And the federal government has actually just extended these emergency waivers so that schools will be able to provide universal school meals through the entire 2021-22 school year. So that means that we'll have had children and families in schools who have been using a different form of universal school meals, but universal school meals nonetheless, for over 2 years. And we know that we can't go back to the old model. We have an opportunity right now as we learn from the pandemic to grow and to create more equitable systems and really create structures that work for families, work for kids, and work for our education system. And that includes universal school meals.
Yeah, for many students, over half their nutrition is coming from school meals. So it's really a question of equity to be able to provide fresh and local food that every student can access and have access to. We also saw with COVID the disruption in the food system and the importance of a strong and thriving local food system. So to be able to create, a steady institutional market for producers is really important. And I think also just, coming off of the last year, the importance of health, the importance of nutrition for good health, and to be able to invest in that. And I'm noticing a few things in chat, and I just want to say, to be able to support schools that have something like $1.25 to put food on the plate right now. So an incentive that helps to increase what they have in order to purchase fresh and local food, and universal meals that helps take away some of the administrative burden and all the complications that come with that, is really a way to support stronger school meal programs.
Great. And so now we get to talk about the exciting news, which is where we are now. So we'll share a little bit about that, and then we'll be pausing for some questions. And I can't see this chat while we're doing this, so I apologize if there are some questions that have been popping up, but we'll have time at the end to do that. So where we are now, all three components of the Farm Fresh School Meals for All bill have been hotly debated in the Senate this year. We've spent a lot of time in a number of different committees talking about all three of those components. And as I mentioned earlier, today the Senate made some huge steps in moving us closer to Farm Fresh School Meals for All. So where we are now on the universal school meals front is that S100, which is the bill that contains universal school meals, was passed today with preliminary approval unanimously in the Senate. It's been modified a bit, and so what is included in the version that will move over into the House is a mandate for universal school breakfast for all public schools starting in the 2022 school year, which is when those waivers from the federal government go away. So a seamless transition from the federal waivers that are allowing for universal school breakfast and lunch to a universal school breakfast model in 2022. And the other exciting part of the bill is that it includes a very strong commitment toward moving toward full universal school meals, breakfast and lunch, in the form of a task force that would come together this fall and report back to the legislature in January of 2022 about how to fund and how to move forward to install full universal school lunch by the 2026 school year. And so with that, the Senate is making a very strong commitment toward the vision of a full universal school meals program, and continuing to work toward that.
And also today, $500,000 for the local purchasing incentive program was in the state budget. That was passed by the Senate, second reading. So we're very excited about that. There's been a lot of work to get that passed, and the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program is still level funded. So we anticipate that that will remain at this point.
All right, and so that's our quick summary. We have a little bit of information up on the screen, and I'll stop sharing the screen a moment so we can open it up for Q&A. We'll be sharing all sorts of links and ways to get involved throughout the evening, but I do just want to share the two websites for this effort. So the Universal School Meals VT.org website and the Vermont Farm to School.org website are the two places to go to get signed up and get engaged. And we'll share more of that in a little bit. And Betsy's and my contact information is up on the screen too. And we welcome you to reach out to us anytime if you have questions or are interested in getting more engaged or have ideas for us to consider. So thank you.
There are no current questions in the chat.
Well, if anyone would like to put their hand up if they do have any questions, I'm going to let that stay open for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, we'll move on. All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Faye and Betsy. Just ecstatic that it all came together today, in fact. And I know how hard both of you have been working on this. So super exciting. And I'm so glad we're having this event this evening because it feels a bit more like a... Sorry, Amy.
Sorry to interrupt. We did just get one question from Abby. What was your response to those who asked why feed kids who can pay?
Thanks, Abby. That's a great question. I can take that, and Betsy, feel free to fill in with anything that you want to. So that is a question that we get asked sometimes. Why universal? Why is the universal approach so important? And you know what we know, and from what we've heard from teachers and from school food service directors and staff at schools, parents, and in studies, is that there are children who are in need who will not eat until the program is universal. As long as kids are divided into their family's income or have to fill out an application in order to get a school meal, there will be children who either can't afford the school meal, or there will be children who choose not to eat the school meal because of the stigma that's faced with eating that meal and choosing the free lunch. So there are kids pretending that they're not hungry and going without, or eating some kind of snack food instead of a wholesome meal. The universal approach is what raises all kids to the same level and helps everyone eat the same meal together. And you're ready to go back to the classroom and learn after breakfast or after lunch all together.
I think I see another question in the chat from Anna Allen. What's the strongest opposition to this initiative?
So it looks like Amy put a little bit in the chat to that as well. You know, for universal school meal side of things, the opposition is kind of who pays. There isn't really a question about whether or not children should be eating at school, whether or not school lunch is a good thing. But the biggest question and area of concern is who pays and how much it costs. And what's exciting about that is that there's a lot of momentum at the federal level right now too, to help make school meals more affordable for states like Vermont that want to move to a universal school meals model. So we just saw last night, President Biden released the American Families Plan, which includes a number of provisions that would help lower the cost in Vermont for universal school meals by expanding some of the federal programs in which to offer it. So there's a lot happening that's shifting right now around the cost of school meals too.
I just want to emphasize that in the schools that serve universal meals, and I think especially this past year when all schools were doing that, the difference in school culture is phenomenal. And the way that the students on so many levels, as Faye described, really changes how students are interacting with each other, and just the amount of participation in the meal program. So you can see the benefits this year especially, and you can see it in schools that haven't been offering universal meals. And I think that many people this year are understanding that to go back to that system doesn't make sense.
Betsy, it looks like there's some question around the local incentive program, around the structure, around what agency is running that. If you want to take that question.
Sure. So it would be part of the reimbursement that schools receive from the state. So it would go through the Agency of Education Child Nutrition Program. And the Agency of Agriculture has already offered their assistance to help the Agency of Education with elements of the program, putting that in place. And Rosie Kruger has been testifying and has been involved in, how the program would roll out and how that would get structured. And so I think we've got, I think we'd be ready to put that in place pretty quickly.
Wonderful. I was going to say we might have time for one more question, but it looks like we're getting a little bit tight. So I'm going to move it on, but thank you so much, Faye and Betsy, for your expertise and for pushing for this. It's been really great listening to you and learning so much more about this. Moving on to our next speaker, other than the students themselves, is educators that see the effects of hunger can have on education and child development. So speaking to us now on her experience as a culinary educator, we have Chef Fenimore from Rutland.
Hi, folks. A little bit of my perspective. I am a single mom, and I've been a public school teacher for almost 2 decades. And I've been a chef for 2 decades as well. I have experience dealing with nutrition. So I have a unique perspective on this one, and I'm here to speak for the kids. And I know it's been working a little bit better in elementary schools. However, we need to do better. I am here because my students don't eat the lunches that are provided. And I know my friends who are running the cafeteria are trying to do their best to feed delicious and nutritious meals to the kids. But the regulations that dictate the nutritional guidelines that our friends in the cafeteria have to follow are really inappropriate for high schoolers, especially. I have a 6-year-old who's in kindergarten this year, and the lunch he was receiving at school didn't have enough protein. And I was advised to send him with more in his snack. I have a friend whose son, when he was in 7th grade and receiving a universal school lunch, because that was the option in Rutland City at the time, his pediatrician advised her that she needed to send in more protein as well, because he was actually gaining weight because his body was going into a fasting situation from the lack of protein in his meal in 7th grade. Our guidelines are not enough protein. And I totally appreciate that we want to support all of our local farms and get local produce. Local produce can be expensive, and so can protein. And that's why I think protein is so neglected in the school meals. Our high school athletes cannot function if they're only getting 2 ounces of protein at a lunch. So that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to advocate for those guidelines to be changed. And the reason why is because since the cafeteria has to work it within these guidelines, where they have to serve breads that are half whole grain, the kids find the food disgusting and they won't eat it. Only the kids who are starving will actually eat this food. So the stigma still exists, because the kids who can just say, oh well, and throw it away and run to my desk where they know I might have ramen noodles, or go ask the school nurse who might have pudding in her desk for something else, the kids just aren't going to eat these meals until they're actually delicious. And in order for the cafeterias to be serving food that is nutritious, appropriate, and delicious, they need to have different guidelines that they're working under. Our current guidelines are driving our cafeterias to buy in frozen foods with nutrition labels on them that they can easily report out. They do not have time, manpower, or budgets to be developing recipes. They need to have more resources in order to be serving delicious food, and they need to have looser guidelines. And I know that sounds crazy, but if a nutritionist looks at the guidelines that students have to eat their lunches under right now and tells me that the sodium is an appropriate amount, I'd be shocked. It's so small. There's a lot of flaws there. And I feel that now that we've had some wins here, this is what we should have our eyes on next, because until the kids actually find the food delicious, there's still going to be a stigma.
Thank you, Lisa, for your perspective, especially coming from a chef. That's a really valuable insight into what students are facing on the ground and the importance of universal school meals, but also that we make sure that those meals are nutritious for our students. So thank you for your input. Now we have another voice from the front lines, an important voice of an important voice of experience, school food service provider Carol Kent.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I, like Lisa, came from the restaurant world into school food service. So I had worked for 35 years or so in food service, doing catering and restaurant work, and found a calling to be in school food service. And it's interesting that I'm here where I am now, testifying for universal school meals and farm fresh food for all, because that's why I got into school food service. I believe we needed change. Like Lisa, I don't necessarily agree with all the guidelines, and we do our very best to put out good meals as best we can within those guidelines using what we have. This is why this is so important. We really need this bill to make universal meals accessible for all kids. We're so bound in our school districts as directors by the paperwork, by chasing down bills, procurement regulations. It's a lot of time, and that doesn't leave a lot of time for creativity and innovation and procuring local foods and building relationships with farmers. And that's one thing that this universal meals will open up for a lot of schools. A lot of schools struggle with trying to make really excellent meals on the budgets they're on. This is really going to help. And we currently, like in my district, we do probably 15 to 20% local product. And our kids are really, I'm getting a little choked up. What we're finding this past year with the universal school meals is that kids who are finally able to eat for free, they don't have to worry about the stigma. They don't have to worry about shame. They're trying new foods. This gives us an opportunity to really normalize school lunch. And it's not about who has what food or who doesn't have food. It's about trying new things. Kids are seeing that their peers are eating rutabagas and kale, and they want to try it too. So it really normalizes that. It really advances farm to school. It advances the acceptance of local produce. And And that's a huge win for everybody. That's going to make our farmers more successful and make our children healthier in the long run. So I'm with Lisa. I think we can do better. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And if directors and school nutrition programs have the space and have the support to purchase local and have the time to innovate and get more creative, and are not worried about, chasing down delinquent bills, we're going to see incredible things happen in our cafeterias. We've seen that start to blossom this year a little bit. And she's right, kids don't eat it if it doesn't taste good. And if one kid says it doesn't taste good, the next kid isn't even going to try it. So this just opens up a lot of room for us to do our very best work. And I'm excited about that. We've seen, I also represent the School Nutrition Association of Vermont, which is an association of food service directors and school nutrition professionals. And we've put out a survey recently trying to get some stories from people in the field. And we've had close to 700 responses thus far. And overwhelmingly, teachers and administrators are sharing that, as Betsy mentioned, the culture of lunch is changing. It's one of equality across the board. It's calmer, and the students are calmer after lunch, and they're getting their work done, and they're interacting differently than they do in the cafeteria. It's brought the level of anxiety down around food, and it's just horrible to me and I'm sure, Lisa, you can agree with this, lunch should never be a stressful time. Taking a meal should be a wonderful event and a calming experience. It shouldn't be filled with stress and anxiety. And unfortunately, that's the culture that has been built over the past many, many years in schools. Universal Meals breaks that down, and it helps all children feel more comfortable in that midday meal. So I don't know if I've taken up too much time, or because I could go on for hours about this. I believe wholeheartedly that yes, we can do better. And you know what? We will do better. And this incentive is going to inspire a lot of schools to really step up and build relationships with their farmers and put that food on the table. I know I'm very involved with Vermont Feed and helping to promote that. I think that's our next big step.
Thank you so much, Carol, for your perspective. And I think it's easy to get choked up about this because of how critical it is for our students and ultimately our children in Vermont. Our next speaker was meant to be Representative Supernat. Unfortunately, she is still on the House floor, which is often one of the problems of hosting these events with some of our great advocates being in the State House. They're often working very, very late. So hopefully she will come off the House floor before the event is over. But if not, that's just the way these things work occasionally. Up next then is my colleague and state director for Vermont to speak a little bit about rights and democracy, renews, and how this relates to food justice. We have Dan Fingus.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. I am definitely a poor substitute for Representative Supernat, but would love to talk with you about rights and democracy and our Vermont Renews work. Rights and Democracy is a 5-year-old social justice organization that has been really working towards economic, racial, climate justice, and our big coalition and campaign that we've been working on for this past year and a half is Vermont Renews. And Vermont Renews is really about a just transition for Vermont. We're facing this interlocking crisis of racial, economic, and climate injustice, and we know that our systems are broken, and so we've brought together a coalition of partners, including 350 Vermont, Community Action Works, Justice for All, Migrant Justice, the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, Sierra Club, and Vermont AFL-CIO, and others to really fight for big systematic change that is keyed in on good paying jobs, good jobs that pay a livable wage, safe and affordable housing, access to healthy food, and clean air and water. And this fight for universal school meals really is a real foundation for access to healthy food, which we see as a basic need for all Vermonters, including, of course, Vermont's student population. And so we're working to win legislation not only for universal school meals, but also that would pilot a model of our region's next food system, a healthy and equitable system centered on ecologically sound farming practices, local production, fair labor standards, and a fundamental right to nutritious food. So we really feel like there's a lot that is going well with the agriculture sector in Vermont, but there's so much better that we can be doing, so much more equity in the system we can have. And we're really excited to be partnering with Hunger Free Vermont and Vermont Feed and other partners on this initiative. And we think it's the first of many that Rights and Democracy is going to work on.
Thank you so much, Dan. And it is the time of the evening now where we start asking a little bit about what you can do as activists to really help push not just this legislation, but other legislation as well. So two things I want to talk about on the Rights and Democracy side in terms of what we've got coming up that you can be part of that will help push these kind of these policies through the State House. The first up is a huge event that we hold every year. We've got our annual May Day event, which is the International Workers' Day. We'll be joining a coalition of labour, community and environmental organisations as we rally on May Day in solidarity with Vermont workers. So this year we'll be standing with farm workers, essential workers, teachers, state employees and all Vermont workers to protect workers' rights and public pensions, and a call for jobs guarantee and healthcare for all. So this is going to be happening on the State House lawn between 12 and 1:30. Then we'll be marching to, or driving to Hannaford supermarkets, where we'll be supporting migrant justice and dairy workers with Milk with Dignity campaign. Just a little few words on that. The Milk with Dignity campaign is championed by Migrant Justice. Workers milking cows on Vermont's dairy farms are just fighting for basic labour and protections that others take for granted, which is just a minimum wage, 1 day off per week, basic health and safety protections, and protections against retaliation. So you can support Migrant Justice and join in solidarity with all of us this May Day to fight for those basic protections. It's not just Migrant Justice there, although we are all standing in solidarity with them in that event, but with us is Vermont AFL-CIO, Vermont NEA, FSEA, 350 Vermont, the Black Perspective, the Vermont Workers Centre, Champlain Valley and Central Vermont DSA chapters, Planned Parenthood, Community Voices for Immigrant Rights, and a whole host of other locals. So please join us this May on the State House lawn at 12 o'clock for that incredible event. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit is about Lobby Day. This is an event that we're planning to make an annual thing. So this Wednesday, May 5th, we will be lobbying our legislators on some of the top issues we are focused on to advance justice and equity in our Vermont communities. So what this will be is hosted by our Movement Politics Director, Kaya Morris. We will be speaking and giving testimony on the House floor and the Senate floor in committee hearings to push for various policies that we want to see go through, things like S100, although it's already done pretty well today, so we might not be fighting for that on that specific day. So Kaya will be teaching folks in a couple of trainings before this lobby day on Monday, May 3rd, about how to give effective testimony, what the mechanics of state government are, how to get one-on-ones with your state reps, because you'll also get the opportunity to speak to your state reps on this day, and why these kind of events are really so effective. Please, if you want to kind of take part in that and actually speak to the state government directly, see how democracy works, please sign up. And I believe Dan Fingers will be putting the event links in the chat. But those are two really big action items that you can take part in that really actually do make a difference. And then finally, regards to S100 and universal school meals, Hunger Free Vermont has created a click to action link. And this is a link that you can follow, and then you can sign a card to support universal school meals. And we'll be sending that to state representatives when this does get to the House to show that the support the universal school meals has among the population in Vermont. And again, it's just another effective way of showing how much popular support this has and how much we as voters want this to go through. This is a really simple thing you can do. You can click it right now. You can add your name to the list, and it just adds your name to that ever-growing list of folks saying that it's time to have universal farm fresh school meals in our schools in Vermont. So that's a really easy one you can do now. Wonderful. Well, I am now going to leave the floor open to Anor Horton, who is going to introduce our potentially final speaker for this evening, or at least our headliner for this evening. We'll see if Rep. Supernor does come on, but I'll leave it over to you, Anor.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom. And it's wonderful to get the chance to be with everybody tonight to celebrate the great victories in the Vermont Senate today. And it's especially sweet to have Senator Chris Pearson here to celebrate with us. And it's really an honor to get to introduce him tonight. Throughout every step of the long and winding and rocky path that has led to this day with S100 and the local food purchasing incentive, Senator Pearson has been making sure that our voices as advocates and the voices of school nutrition professionals and farmers and the families working hard to raise the next generation here in Vermont were being heard and were being represented in the Vermont Senate. And he did this as he deftly negotiated S100 and the local food purchasing incentive through committee after committee after committee this session. Senator Pearson is a huge champion of the fundamental principles that underlie the vision of farm fresh school meals for all. Universality first and foremost, that every child in every school in Vermont deserves to have access to all of the same supports and benefits while they're at school. And that, of course, includes the fundamental right to have healthy local school meals at no charge as an essential part of every student's education here in Vermont. And also the principle that our schools are local community hubs and they're drivers of our local farm economies, and we need to support them and support our local farmers in the beautiful virtuous cycle that Betsy shared with us earlier. And finally, the principle that no child should ever learn what hunger feels like at school. So Senator Pearson, thank you so much for being our champion and for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Anor. That's very kind of you. And I mean, the credit goes around. It takes a whole village to feed our kids, and the advocates here on the panel tonight, you know, are a quick text away for me in the middle of a committee discussion, giving me answers and really backing up the whole premise. So thank you, Faye and Betsy, and who else is here? Amy's here, and Anor, I know you're in the background. And I thought I saw, who did I see? Somebody from Abby from another era. Anyway, tons of people helping. Thank you. We did have a good victory today. We had nobody vote against it after months of delay and oh gosh, and hair pulling, and could we really, and what about blah blah blah, and property taxes. Everybody voted for it. And so I don't know what folks are really want to talk about. I'm hoping there's time for Q&A if that makes sense, but I'll just give you a little bit of my perspective and tell you a little bit about the bumpy road, and then I want to talk to you about the House, because it's anything but a done deal over there, to say the least. Number one, we came in wanting to address food security, right? I'm assuming you've talked about that, but we're really worried about the growth in hunger for our state, and for young people in particular are kind of off the charts levels we haven't seen in 20 years. Not surprising given what we've all just been through, what we're going through still with the pandemic. I serve as the vice chair of the Senate Ag Committee, and last year we started this conversation about getting food, local food into schools, right? This is, you would think in Vermont, not a hard political lift to get farm fresh food into schools and all the benefits that go with that. And we've been doing that. We're lauded thanks to the work of a lot of the folks on this call. Betsy in particular, I think of as the face of it, but everybody's been working hard on that. But it's really sort of smattered around the schools and around the state, and it's not systematized. It's been promoted and supported by the state, but it's been very dependent on a school board or a food director in a particular school. And a lot of us started in the last couple of years saying, you know, we need to make this a little more systematized and make it easy for people, not dependent on one parent that just won't stop dogging the school board or what have you. And we started looking at local food incentives that were working in New York, and we've since heard working very well in New York and in Oregon and some other places, where they just sort of basically say to schools, you don't have to do this, but if you do it, if you put 25% of your food is bought locally, we'll give you 25 cents a meal. And that ends up being a real sweetener. And what we learned last year was, or just a few months ago, was in New York State, there are schools that are exceeding 60% of their food locally. So this is totally working. And I'll just say as an aside, I serve on the Ag Committee. I live in Burlington. I mow my lawn, right? I don't have a lot of ag experience, but what that ignorance or coming to this and learning about it has been helpful, because from my perspective, I'm not entrenched in the dairy universe. I think, you know, looking at the last 30 years of agriculture in Vermont, continuing to bend state policy to serve dairy doesn't make a lot of sense to me for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is the economics for our farmers, and the next generation is not interested in dairy. So I think we have an obligation to make it easy for diversified ag to come in for the next phase. What's that going to look like? It's not going to be mono, you know, one product as it's been for the last 100 years. It's going to be diversified. Well, how do we promote that? It's hard, right? We're not in the business of giving money to farmers for anything, but we do buy a lot of food for our schools, right? And so could we web them together? And what the data shows us in New York is, as you would imagine, it works. People are saying, oh, you know what? I'm a farmer. I can depend on this local school buying whatever. I'm going to buy that piece of equipment. I'm going to build that into my business. I'm a bakery. I know that I can depend on taking bread to the elementary school for 10 months of the year. I'm going to add that to my business. And it becomes not like the profit center, but a baseline. You know, if you're a consultant, you'd call it the baseline client, right? And everything on top of that, it allows you some fundamentals to build your business. And so that's where we started talking about it. Then the pandemic and the clear food security issues came forward, and Bobby Starr, who's a crusty old Kingdom senator, he was a school board chair for a long time, and he created universal meals in the Northeast Kingdom. And so we got a little lucky, as Bobby for many, many years has supported this. And the folks were ready, and we made a push. What you'll find if you talk to school food directors, and you've probably talked about this, but every school in Vermont has been universal for the last year during the pandemic because of federal waiver. And we're going to have that again next year. The feds just extended that. And it's been great. And people have literally delivered foods. And, you know, it's been a real lifesaver for people. When you talk to the food directors, there was a guy from Westford in Essex who came in and told us an interesting story. And, you know, if it's been a while since you've been in the cafeteria, I'll just paint a picture. They're serving universal meals to low and free and reduced kids in poverty, right? They go through this line and they get whatever is put on the tray, and their hunger issues, we maybe would argue, is somewhat dealt with. But then the kids from middle class and upper class families go through a different line because they want the a la carte items. And so you have, while you've handled the food issue, maybe, you have a strata that is plainly developed, and you have a stigma that is perpetuated every day at lunch. And what the food director told us in Essex, because of this last year, he said, we got rid of the a la carte and we put more money into the food lunch line. And every kid came through that lunch line and the stigma went away. And by the way, our food got better because we had more money to put there. And he started talking about the cultural shift and what that meant. And suddenly it wasn't like the cool kids on one side and the other kids with their trays. Everyone just had a tray and everyone ate food together. And I think not only is it important for all the reasons we've been talking about, but I think you need to say to parents who feel like their property tax bills just go up, hey, schools are going to give you something. We're just it's going to be a positive for your kid. You don't have to worry about making lunch. You don't have to worry about breakfast. We're just going to take care of that at school. That we handle that. You don't have to buy a textbook in high school. In fact, you don't have to buy a Chromebook now, right? But we can't afford to give you a sandwich. I mean, it's ridiculous. So anyway, the premise is there. What you found in the legislature, which horrifies me, and I guess is no surprise, but people say, well, what about all those rich kids that we're going to give them free lunch? Oh, the horror, right? Well, we give them free textbooks and we give them free Chromebooks, but free lunch, that would be too much. And the legislature is not made up of average Vermonters. And so maybe you might say the legislature is made up of those wealthy people, and by and large, or certainly the comfortably off. And so they maybe exaggerate the numbers and don't understand that. So that's been really hard, but we managed to hold on to the universal principle for breakfast. And, the question was, should we just serve more reduced lunches, make it more? And I wanted the whole thing, but I thought it was more important than expanding lunch was to hold on to the universal principle and push at least breakfast. That's what's going through the Senate now, and we'll go to the House. So anyway, I could go on and on. I love this topic. It's really important. We are going to start by investing at least $500,000 into the local food incentive, start that up, but we've got more work to do there because the budget writers sort of break things down in one way. It's either part of the base, like something we're going to pay for every year, or one time. And they're very hesitant to give us fun stuff in the ongoing budget. So right now they put this in the one time. Okay, so we're going to have to go back and fight for this next year, but it's going to work. It's going to work. It's going to be a success. And it's at least as valuable as those idiotic grants we give people to work here, to move here, and remote work and all that kind of crap that we give to business incentives. This is easily going to generate economic activity. So I'm totally confident it's going to work, but that battle I'll come back to you and let you know when we have to engage there. But more immediately, I need your help in the House. We will send this bill to them tomorrow. They'll start working on it hopefully next week, or they'll start having possession of it. It's late in the session, so advocate now, advocate through the fall, and come back hard in January, because that's what we're going to need to do to get this across the finish line. And I'm confident we can do it, right? It's like in the private meetings that I'm in, people are expressing their concerns and then everyone votes for it. Because why? We're feeding kids and we're supporting farmers. Like, what is a problem with either of those? In public, people will be there. It's tricky because it's not cheap. It's not free. But as Bobby Starr said, $25 million sounds like a lot until you remember we're spending $1.7 billion for education. This is crumbs. This is a tiny rounding error in the ed budget, and it's such an important service for all the reasons you know. And thank you very much, everybody. And be glad to answer questions. I don't know what the setup time is, but thank you, and great to be part of this coalition. You're looking at a very, very effective coalition building on the work that's been laid over the last decade. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. We actually do have a fair amount of time left because we did have a speaker, unfortunately, not able to make it. So lots of time for Q&A. So if anyone's got a question for Senator Pearson, now would be a great time to ask.
Just noting there's a thank you in the chat, Senator Pearson, for you, and also some cheers for Bobby Starr.
And I must point out too, Brian Campion from Bennington, we wouldn't have gotten this through. He's the chair of ed. He's a brand new chair. And so here's the ag committee sort of saying like, here you go, Mr. Chair. We've developed this wonderful education bill, which is that itself is kind of weird in our little dynamic. And he grabbed right hold of it and ran with it. And we owe him a real debt too.
Senator Pearson, when you say that you need help in the House, it's going to go to a specific committee. Do you know which one? And then also, if someone wanted to reach out, should they reach out to that committee, to their specific state representative? What's the help you need?
Yes. You know, people often ask me these kinds of questions, and as if there's a wrong answer. You're a citizen and a voter, and you should talk to your legislator. You should always talk to your local person and never assume, you know, if you wrote me about this bill, hopefully I'd find a moment to get back to you, and I would feel good because I could tell you, you know, I've been working really hard. Thanks for your support. If I was opposed to this bill, it would register even if I don't answer. It's likely to go to I would guess, to House Ed, and we need pressure on there. So definitely you can, and everybody can reach out, you know, everybody has a right to talk to any elected official or email them. But even if your particular rep doesn't sit on the ed committee, you maybe could email the whole ed committee and say, this is really important to me, and my rep told me I should reach out, you know, or my senator told me I should reach out. So don't be shy. I mean, you know, think about the right wing. The right wing doesn't sort of sit and say, how could we politely advocate for this? What's the right strategy, right? They're just like throwing it at us. The left wing, we're too polite. But the answer is, Dan, yes. Talk, speak up, ask people, ask them on social media, send them emails, and don't be shy. And you know, I think you can be polite in your message, but make sure that people hear from you on this one.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry, Senator Pearson.
No, please go ahead.
If I could just add too, for folks who are interested in, you know, in addition to calling or emailing your representatives and asking them to get engaged in this issue as it moves over into the House, by signing one of the Universal School Meal Supporter Cards, you'll also get signed up for non-spammy e-news. We only send it out when there's something to say, but it's a great way to stay engaged and keep your eye on different calls to action and different things that are needed throughout the rest of the session and through the summer and the fall. So we'll be starting to make our plans of how to move this into the Senate too, and that's a great way to also get engaged.
You know, I just wanted to share this story because this bill is new, and we would be the first state to do universal school meals across the whole state. But you know, I think, am I right to say New York City does it? I mean, they trump our they dwarf our population, right? So it's been done in a significant way, but always helpful for a state to stake out ground. But like I said, we've been doing this in different ways and district by district for what, Betsy, easily 10, 12 years. And people may remember, I think probably folks on this call were part of pressuring Sodexo, which offers food service up at UVM. And they did even when I went there in the 90s, and it'd been there a long time. They're a big corporation. They do this all over the country. They're not who we would think of as cutting edge on local foods and sort of the new food movement. They serve, they are committed, and they honor this commitment. 20% of their food is bought locally. This is a huge institution, right? And this is where you start to generate real money in local ag. And the Intervale Center is you know, a huge part of their business model, because they aggregate from farms and get it up to Sodexo. And they did this because well, my version of the history is in California, students were protesting and getting Sodexo yanked off of campus, and they were losing lucrative contracts. And they knew Vermont was not far behind. And so they jumped in and said, fine, we'll commit to 20%. I think there was a lot of GMO arguments at the time too. Maybe they have a commitment there. And they still go 20% local food at least. And when you talk to folks up there, what they'll tell you is the reason they continue to do that is the Vermont students that come from schools that have farm to school programs. And they get into the UVM cafeteria and they expect fresh local produce and they ask for it. And I just, to me, it gives me shivers. This is when we talk about climate, when we talk about local economy, when we talk about health, this is how it's going to work. Is our only shot is those curriculums. It's not just the local farmer, but it's the curriculums. It's the whole education of what it means to be part of an ecosystem. And to the idea that college freshmen and sophomores are walking into UVM and demanding local food, I think it is so exciting and gives me real hope for us to, after all, if we're not engaging with local ag in the climate crisis, you know, we got no shot. And when you realize that Vermont is a rural state, you know, in some ways we're ahead of the game. In some ways we haven't even started playing on these kinds of questions. And so the models are really there, and it ends up being way bigger than just feeding kids at school, and something we can be really proud of. We have to build on.
Well, I think that would be a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, Senator Pearson, for coming on and just taking us through that. I really appreciated, and as is all of your hard work.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Well, that is our lot for this evening. Thank you to all of our speakers: Faye Mack, Betsy Rosenbluth, Lisa Fenimore, Carol Kent, Dan Fingers, Anil Horton, and of course our special guest, Senator Chris Pearson. Also a big thank you to Hunger Free Vermont, Shelburne Farms, Rights and Democracy, Nova Vermont, and Vermont Feed for planning and putting this event on. And mostly big thanks to Hunger Free Vermont and Vermont Feed for pushing and fighting for universal school meals. Honestly, it would not have got through the Senate today if it wasn't for you. You've done absolutely phenomenal work, and at Rights and Democracy, we can't wait to work with you more in getting this through the House, and I'm sure that's gonna happen. So a big congratulations for getting S100 through the Senate today. Really do enjoy this moment. It always feels so good when that hard work pays off. But I'm going to leave it there for this evening. Thank you all so much for coming. I've been your host, Tom Proxer, and I hope everyone has a great night. See you.